Hello, I'm John, and welcome to Edgetone Studios. When I was designing my studio and preparing this space, I spent a lot of time looking at all the ways I was going to use the space and all the ways I can make it work the best for me. And I knew that I had a strong sense of the aesthetics I wanted for the space. So that meant the color choices, the type of material, like the cedar on the walls, the vintage look, mid-century sort of couch that we were able to find secondhand. All these things were very deliberate choices as I was building. I also had full plans for the layout and was figuring out where I was going to put my gear. And I decided early on my synthesizers were going to go on the back wall, and I had to find a way to be able to control them via MIDI, which I talked about in another video on the MioXM by eye connectivity, I should say. And I knew that I was going to have to cable a lot of audio cable to connect these all into my setup, and I spent some time planning out a patch bay, figuring out exactly what I could connect, how many I could fit, how complicated I could get without making it too messy. And I also wanted everything to be always connected, so I could simply fire up my DAW, pick a patch on a synth, either by standing at it or remotely, go to my controller, play, and start recording. I also have a tracking room that has 16 mic inputs coming in, and I wanted those things to be connected. And of course, there was a tug of war between what gear was going to be connected versus what mic inputs were going to be connected permanently, because I really couldn't have them all connected, even though I had a 32-channel input. And eventually I got everything plotted out and planned out meticulously exactly how my patch bay was going to be laid out in Google Sheets, and connected everything up and started working in the space. I'd had the space for about a month, and I realized I couldn't stand working with a rack mount audio interface with software control of the preamps. I wanted something with physical hands-on controls. So I decided to completely change my gear and move from Apollo gear to Presonus StudioLive mixer. I talk about that in another video as well. So I completely reconfigured my desk. I completely reconfigured my layout of cabling from my new mixer to my patch bay. I completely redesigned my patch bay, tried to make it a little bit better from the first version I'd had now that I was making changes. And over a period of about a month, I got all the new gear in. I set up my room new and started working with it. And that's the way it's been set up for pretty well a year. And I've been working on my album with my daughter. We've recorded 12 songs in here, well, 11 that we've recorded vocals for. The 12th one we're working on. I've had a live band in here doing testing of live streaming, and I've learned a lot about my setup. And the big question that came to me really is my studio too complicated? And it was interesting because that was something on my mind as I was planning out how I could make things a little bit better. And then yesterday, I watched a video by Venus Theory called "Will Minimalism Make You a Better Creator?" And I was fascinated to watch this video because minimalism is something I've been fascinated by for years. I've thought the idea of simple living or minimalism and the idea of reducing what you have and reducing your choices is just something compelling about it. It really draws me in. And this is interesting to me because my natural state is to get it all, to go all in, to be the collector of everything. When I started repurchasing vintage synths, I wanted all of them. I specifically limited myself in my planning to 4 synthesizers on each wall so that I wouldn't buy too many. If I could afford them, I probably would have bought 20. And then it would just be a cluttered mess in here. Even so, I ended up pulling more audio cable to the back than I was planning because the snake I bought for that connection had more audio connections on it than I was originally thinking I'd use. So what did I do? I decided to add more gear, and then I put the drum machines that you see back there and the drum synthesizer, the vocoder. I just kept coming up with more stuff I could add to my studio. And to some extent, this is fantastic. I love it. But to another extent, it's made things complicated. So now that I've been working with my studio for a good year, and I've really gotten to know the ins and outs of how I have it set up, I've figured out there's quite a few things that need to change. So that's what I'm about to do. I just finished up the composition for our 12th song. Candace is now working on the lyrics for that. And while she's doing that, and we're not recording till the end of next week, I'm going to do a complete reconfig again, which means completely reconfiguring my patch bay. Okay, so let me grab my portable camera here and show you what I'm dealing with. So this is my desk layout. There's my digital mixer. Of course, it's out of focus. There you can see it. And as you can see, I've got a 19-inch rack on this side of my desk with 2 units above. And then on this side, I have an enclosed space that has my computer and then a drawer for miscellaneous stuff. And of course, because there's 2 units up here, what I put up there was my monitor controller and a power bar. And then below, I picked up this Roland digital delay, early 80s, for cheap. And the reason I bought it is I had a rack space available, and I have that desire to fill everything up if I can. Then there's a headphone amplifier, analog saturator, my mix bus, followed by EQ and compressor for the mix bus, and then my 500 series rack. And, this all works fine, except for the fact that every time I go to adjust an EQ or preamp down here, I literally have to bend down to see settings if I don't know them intimately. And even if I do, you just have to get a look sometimes at what you're doing. It's awkward. Then I've got my crazy patch bay with 4 48-point patch bays here. And if you know anything about patch bays, you use them to bring the external inputs at the back of your gear out front so they're easy to access. But you also use them to standardize your default setup for your room so that certain things automatically are connected to certain things in your studio setup. And that's what I've puzzled over for weeks and weeks. And below that, I have my 11 rack. And what I found is that I really want to get those preamps above the desk, and there is enough room to do that if I reconfigure my desk. So I'm going to be rebuilding the top of my desk so that there's a 3-unit rack space above. The preamps can then move up in the 500 series rack. On the other side, I've just got an amp, so I'm going to move that amp to the bottom of the rack and then use those 3 slots for more important things like my analog saturator, bring the EQ up, bring the compressor up, and then I'm going to have things that I use frequently that I actually have to see while I'm adjusting, know what knob I'm reaching for. I mean, you listen to make the adjustments, but you have to see what you're adjusting. So I want to bring those up to be more convenient and therefore less complicated to have to not look down or go on my knees to check what I'm touching compared to looking at something that's right in front of me. Now, let me show you what my patch bay layout looks like and the type of crazy complication I put my brain through. Okay, so here's the spreadsheet I created for my current setup. And you can see I have 4 different 48-point patch bays. and what's going in or coming out of each one. So I've got my StudioLive mix outs up here. I've got my inputs for the XLR IMs into the StudioLive here. I've got the line inputs into the StudioLive here, plus a couple over here. I've got my 11 rack, etc. There's a lot of stuff, and I've laid it out such that I put a bold line around anything that's normaled, and what I mean by normaled is whatever's coming out this input here is going into this input. So StudioLive Mix 2 by default always goes into headphone number 1 right. StudioLive Mix 1 always goes into headphone 1 left. And the beauty of the patch bay is if I decided that Mix 1 and 2 needed to go to headphones 4 left and right, I could just take a cable from here to here and a cable from here to here and reroute that. And that's the whole point of having the patch bay in the first place, is things are set up with a default setting and then you can repatch them. But what I tried to do was put my studio XLRs in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 to 14. The first 5 being always there, because most of the time I might just have a acoustic guitar and vocals, or a small session. 5 mics seemed to be enough. And then if I needed more, I could patch in the rest. The problem I came up with was 1 to 5 went into my Radial 500 series rack and into 500 series preamps, and those had to go into line inputs, which started at 17. So now 1 to 5 mapped to 17 to 21, and 6 to 14 mapped to XLR 1 to 8 inputs on the mixer, or 1 to 9. So this just became too confusing when I was working with it day to day. So on my new layout, what I've done is, for one thing, I had all these extra phone inputs for different phone sends, which I'm just completely eliminating. They're not even here anymore. Just going to have 2 headphone sends. My radial inputs start at 17 now, but they're laid out in such a way that in the studio, I'm in the tracking room, I'm going to label the wall jacks as 11 to 24 for the microphones. And then I have 2 more. I have 16 inputs, so there's 2 more that are my mains returning. And that way, even though my mics start on 11, I can always map what mic goes to what. So my default here, 11 to 16, won't normally be used. I'll use 17 to 24. I'll have 8 SSL 6-channel or 6CH, as they're called, 500 series preamps as my default pre's. And then if I need more, the entry or the control room could be patched into any of the other XLR inputs on the back of the mixer by using the patch bay. And all my default gear I use, my Polybrute, my DW8000, etc., will always be plugged in to certain connections, labeled on the mixer, and easy for me to quickly set up and record. However, I've complicated it a bit further by getting a little summing mixer. I got this DMP7 old Yamaha 1987 mixer, digital mixer, that I'm going to use on one side of the room and sum those all into 2 inputs. So that's the way I can keep so many mics free, whereas previously those mic inputs were being plugged up or used up by synthesizers. So have I made it much simpler? I'm not sure. So as you can see, my studio is too complicated. It's a little bit crazy, especially the current configuration, where when I go to patch something in patch number 1 in the tracking room, it actually comes out on channel 17 on my mixer, but it goes through input number 1 on the 500 series rack and comes out input 3. It's confusing as all hell. It all works, it's all there, but every time I change something or go to adjust something, I have to remap in my brain how everything is planned out. So my goal here is to simplify things so that channel 1 always maps to channel 1, that input 1 always maps to input 1. With the digital mixer, everything can be labeled internally and you can have different presets, but even that gets pretty complicated. I'd like it to be as simple as possible. So that's my issue. I'm about to embark on one more massive reconfiguration of my studio, and hopefully this is the last one. I'm attempting not to purchase new gear, even though I just bought 2 new basses in the last 2-3 weeks. I'm going to be selling a couple. I'm trying to keep that number low. I'm trying to keep it realistic and focus more on making music than complicating my studio. So really, my question to you is your studio too complicated? Do you keep it simple? Do you have a way to be efficient that really works? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. See ya.